The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen was running his usual equipment check when he noticed something unusual happening near the main gate. A convoy of unmarked black vehicles had arrived, but what caught his attention was the reaction of the guards. These were hardened military personnel who had seen everything, yet they stood straighter, their usual casual banter replaced by respectful silence. From the lead vehicle emerged a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years perfecting every step, every gesture. Her clothing was simple: dark tactical pants, a fitted black shirt, and boots that had clearly seen real action. But it was her eyes that made Marcus pause mid-motion. They held the kind of steady focus he had only seen in operators who had been tested in the most extreme situations. The woman walked past the checkpoint without showing any identification. The guards simply nodded and waved her through. Marcus had been at this base for 8 years, and he had never seen anyone enter without proper credentials. He watched as she made her way toward the advanced training facility, her steps purposeful and confident. Word traveled fast through the tight-knit community of the base. By noon, rumors were circulating like wildfire. Some said she was CIA. Others whispered about classified operations in places that didn't officially exist on any map. But the most persistent rumor came from Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a man who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. Rodriguez had been in the teams for 15 years. He had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and several other theaters that remained classified. During his lunch break, he gathered a small group of junior operators around him. His voice was low, almost reverent, as he shared what he had learned from his contacts in the intelligence community. The woman was known only by her operational call sign, Ghost. According to Rodriguez, she had appeared seemingly from nowhere about 5 years ago. Her first recorded operation was a rescue mission in Syria that had gone sideways. A team of American contractors had been captured by a militant group, and conventional military options were limited due to political sensitivities. Ghost had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. She would infiltrate the compound alone, neutralize the guards, and extract the hostages. Intelligence suggested there were at least 20 armed militants, fortified positions, and multiple layers of security. Most experts gave the mission a 5% chance of success. She completed it in under 4 hours without firing a single shot being fired in return. The contractors were rescued, the militants were neutralized with surgical precision, and Ghost disappeared back into the shadows before backup forces even arrived. The only evidence of her presence was the perfectly placed shots and the rescued Americans. What made this story even more remarkable was the distance involved. Surveillance footage later revealed that many of her shots had been taken from over 800 meters away in difficult lighting conditions, with a crosswind that would challenge even the most experienced military snipers. Each shot had been a headshot, clean and instantaneous. But Ghost was more than just an exceptional marksman. Intelligence reports suggested she was also an expert in close-quarters combat, explosive ordnance disposal, and electronic warfare. She spoke at least 6 languages fluently and had demonstrated an uncanny ability to blend into local populations regardless of the cultural context. The mystery deepened when background checks revealed absolutely nothing about her past. There were no military records, no criminal history, no educational background, and no family connections that could be traced. It was as if she had materialized fully formed as one of the most dangerous operatives in the world. Some theories suggested she was the product of a classified government program, trained from childhood to be the perfect operator. Others believed she was a former member of an elite foreign unit who had switched allegiances. The most exotic theories involved private military contractors or even criminal organizations that had developed their own training programs. What everyone agreed on was her effectiveness. Over the past 5 years, Ghost had been credited with over 40 successful missions across multiple continents. Hostage rescues, high-value target eliminations, intelligence-gathering operations, and counterterrorism activities. Her success rate was unprecedented, and her methods were studied by military tacticians around the world. Yet despite her reputation, she remained completely off the grid. She had no social media presence, no known address, no financial records that could be tracked. She would appear for a mission, complete it with mechanical precision, submit a brief report through encrypted channels, and then vanish until the next assignment. The SEALs at Coronado had heard whispers about Ghost for years, but none of them had ever expected to see her in person. Her presence at their base meant something significant was happening. Training exercises didn't require operators of her caliber. This was either preparation for something major, or she was here to teach them something they couldn't learn anywhere else. As the afternoon progressed, more details emerged about why Ghost had come to Coronado. Commander Sarah Mitchell, the base intelligence officer, had requested her specifically for a new training program. The program was designed to push even the most experienced SEALs beyond their current limitations, particularly in long-range precision shooting and solo operations behind enemy lines. Ghost would be conducting the training personally, something she had never done before. Usually, her involvement in any operation was strictly operational. She completed missions, filed reports, and disappeared. The fact that she had agreed to share her knowledge suggested that the military was preparing for scenarios that required capabilities beyond their current training standards. The anticipation throughout the base was palpable. These were men who had trained with the best instructors in the world, who had faced combat in the most challenging environments, and who prided themselves on their elite skills. Yet they were about to be taught by someone whose abilities seemed to transcend normal human limitations. As evening approached, Ghost made her way to the armory to inspect the weapons that would be used in the training program. The base armorer, a meticulous man named Thompson, who had been maintaining weapons for 23 years, watched in fascination as she examined each rifle with the care of a master craftsman inspecting precious instruments. She made minor adjustments to several scopes, modified trigger mechanisms with tools she carried in a small kit, and tested the balance of each weapon with movements that seemed almost ritualistic. Thompson had seen thousands of operators handle weapons, but Ghost's interaction with the firearms was different. She seemed to understand each weapon's personality, its strengths and limitations, in a way that went beyond technical knowledge. When she finished her inspection, Ghost looked up at Thompson and spoke for the first time since arriving at the base. Her voice was calm, controlled, with just a hint of an accent that Thompson couldn't identify. She thanked him for maintaining the weapons so well and mentioned that she would need some specialized ammunition for the advanced exercises. The specifications she provided were for rounds that Thompson had heard about but never actually seen. As night fell over the base, the word had spread to every corner of the facility. Tomorrow would begin training unlike anything the SEALs had ever experienced. They would be learning from someone who had achieved what many considered impossible, who had redefined the limits of human capability in the most dangerous situations imaginable. The mystery of Ghost's identity remained unsolved, but her presence promised answers to questions the operators hadn't even known they should ask. In the world of special operations, where the margin between success and failure was measured in millimeters and milliseconds, they were about to learn from someone who had consistently performed miracles under the most extreme pressure. The first training session began at dawn, with 24 of the base's most experienced operators gathered on the main shooting range. These men had each completed multiple combat deployments and were considered among the finest marksmen in the military. Yet as Ghost approached the firing line, carrying a custom rifle that none of them recognized, there was a collective sense that they were about to discover just how much they still had to learn. Ghost positioned herself at the 1,000-meter mark, a distance that challenged even the most skilled snipers under perfect conditions. The morning air was crisp, with a variable crosswind that made precision shooting extremely difficult. Without any warm-up shots or range-finding exercises, she settled into position behind her rifle. The target was a standard silhouette, but Ghost had requested modifications that puzzled the range staff. Instead of aiming for the center mass, she had marked specific points on the target that were barely visible even through high-powered scopes. The first shot rang out, and through their spotting scopes, the observers watched in stunned silence as the bullet struck exactly where she had indicated. What followed was a demonstration that redefined their understanding of what was humanly possible. Ghost fired 25 consecutive shots, each one striking a different predetermined point on various targets scattered across the range. The shots came in rapid succession, with barely a pause between them for target acquisition. Every single round found its mark with mechanical precision. But the real shock came when the range officer announced the conditions under which she had been shooting. The rifle she was using had iron sights only, no scope, no electronic assistance, no range-finding equipment. She had been calculating distance, wind compensation, and bullet drop entirely through observation and experience. The level of skill required for such accuracy was beyond anything the watching operators had ever witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, a sniper instructor with 12 years of experience, found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about marksmanship. He had spent years perfecting techniques that Ghost seemed to execute effortlessly, almost casually. When the demonstration ended, she walked over to where the instructors were standing and asked if they had any questions. The questions came rapidly. How did she calculate wind drift so quickly? What was her method for estimating distance without technological assistance? How did she maintain such consistent accuracy under stress? Ghost answered each question with the patience of a master teacher, explaining techniques that were both incredibly sophisticated and surprisingly simple. Her approach to shooting was based on principles that went far beyond traditional marksmanship training. She had developed methods for reading environmental conditions that incorporated factors most snipers never considered. The way shadows fell, the movement of grass or leaves, the behavior of birds, even the color of the sky, all of these became data points in her calculations. But marksmanship was only the beginning. Over the following days, Ghost introduced the SEALs to training exercises that pushed them into territory they had never explored. She taught them techniques for moving unseen through terrain that offered virtually no cover, methods for remaining motionless for hours while maintaining full alertness, and ways to blend into environments so completely that they became invisible to the most advanced surveillance equipment. One exercise involved infiltrating a mock enemy compound that had been constructed with multiple layers of security. The facility included motion sensors, thermal cameras, guard patrols, and electronic surveillance systems. Previous training exercises in this facility typically required teams of 4 to 6 operators working together to achieve successful infiltration. Ghost completed the exercise alone, in broad daylight, while wearing no specialized equipment beyond standard tactical clothing. She moved through the facility like smoke, avoiding detection by sensors that should have been impossible to evade. The security personnel monitoring the exercise lost track of her completely within the first 10 minutes, despite knowing her approximate location and having access to real-time surveillance feeds. When she emerged from the facility having completed all objectives, the monitoring team reviewed the footage trying to understand how she had done it. Even knowing where to look, they could barely detect her movements. She seemed to understand the limitations and blind spots of every piece of equipment, the patrol patterns of every guard, and the optimal timing for every movement. The psychological impact on the watching SEALs was profound. These were operators who had spent years developing confidence in their abilities, who had succeeded in some of the most challenging missions in modern warfare. Yet they were watching someone perform at a level that seemed to belong in fiction rather than reality. During the evening briefings, Ghost began sharing stories from her operational experience. She never mentioned specific locations or mission details that might be classified, but she provided insights into scenarios that the SEALs found both educational and troubling. Her descriptions of solo operations behind enemy lines revealed a world of warfare that most military personnel never experienced. She spoke about spending weeks alone in hostile territory, living off the land while conducting surveillance on high-value targets. She described situations where the margin for error was so small that a single mistake would have resulted in not just mission failure, but international incidents with catastrophic consequences. What became clear was that Ghost operated in a realm where traditional military doctrine often didn't apply. She had to improvise constantly, adapting to situations that hadn't been anticipated in any training manual. Her success depended not just on technical skills, but on an almost supernatural ability to read situations, anticipate problems, and develop solutions in real time. The SEALs began to understand why every Navy SEAL had snapped to attention when she arrived. It wasn't just respect for her abilities, it was recognition that they were in the presence of someone who had transcended normal human limitations through a combination of natural talent, incredible training, and experiences that had forged her into something unique. During the third day of training, Ghost introduced an exercise that none of the operators had ever encountered. She divided them into two groups, hunters and prey. The hunters would be given all the advantages, advanced equipment, vehicle support, communication systems, and detailed intelligence about the target area. The prey would be given basic gear and a 12-hour head start. The objective for the prey was simple: survive for 72 hours without being captured. The hunters had unlimited resources and the full cooperation of base security. It seemed like an impossible challenge for anyone trying to evade capture on a military installation where every inch was monitored and controlled. Ghost volunteered to serve as the prey for the first exercise. She would take only basic survival gear and attempt to remain undetected for 3 days while an entire team of elite operators hunted her using every available resource. The hunters were confident that the exercise would be over within hours. How could anyone hide on a base where they knew every hiding spot, every security protocol, and every possible escape route? The hunt began at midnight, with Ghost given until noon to establish her position. By the time the hunting teams began their search, she had vanished so completely that they began to question whether she had actually remained on the base. Despite having access to thermal imaging, motion detectors, guard posts, and a team of 12 experienced operators, they found no trace of her presence. Hours turned into days, and still there was no sign of Ghost. The hunting teams expanded their search, brought in additional resources, and employed increasingly sophisticated detection methods. They began to suspect that she had somehow left the base entirely, despite the impossibility of such an escape. On the morning of the third day, with just hours remaining in the exercise, Ghost appeared in the base commander's office. She had been hiding in plain sight, using maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, and abandoned areas of the facility that the hunting teams had either overlooked or dismissed as impossible hiding places. She had not only evaded capture, but had managed to gather detailed intelligence about the hunters' operations, movements, and strategies. The debriefing that followed was unlike anything the SEALs had experienced. Ghost walked them through her movements during the exercise, explaining how she had anticipated their search patterns, avoided their surveillance, and maintained her position despite intensive efforts to locate her. Her methods were so sophisticated that they seemed to belong to a different era of warfare entirely. What impressed the operators most was not just her technical skills, but her psychological understanding of how hunting teams operate. She had predicted their decision-making processes, anticipated their assumptions, and exploited their blind spots with surgical precision. It was as if she could see the exercise from multiple perspectives simultaneously, always staying several steps ahead of her pursuers. As the second part of the training program concluded, the SEALs realized that they had learned more in a few days than in months of conventional training. Ghost had not just taught them new techniques, she had shown them an entirely different way of thinking about warfare, survival, and the limits of human capability. They were beginning to understand why she was considered one of the most effective operators in the world, and why her presence commanded such universal respect. On the final day of training, Ghost received an encrypted message that changed everything. Commander Mitchell called an emergency briefing for all senior personnel, and the atmosphere in the room was tense with urgency. Intelligence had been received about a situation developing overseas that required immediate response, and conventional military options were not viable due to political constraints. A team of American engineers working on a classified infrastructure project in Eastern Europe had been taken hostage by a militant group with suspected ties to hostile foreign governments. The location was a fortified compound in mountainous terrain, surrounded by civilian areas that made traditional military intervention impossible. Any large-scale rescue operation would result in international incidents that could destabilize the entire region. The hostage-takers had made it clear that they were prepared to execute their captives if any rescue attempt was detected. Intelligence suggested they had sophisticated surveillance equipment and enough advanced warning systems to carry out their threats before any traditional assault force could reach the hostages. The timeline was critical. Intelligence indicated the hostages would be moved to an even more secure location within 48 hours. Ghost listened to the briefing with the same calm focus she had displayed throughout the training program. When Commander Mitchell finished presenting the situation, she asked a series of detailed questions about the terrain, weather conditions, enemy capabilities, and available intelligence. Her questions revealed a depth of tactical thinking that impressed even the senior officers present. The plan that emerged was audacious, even by special operations standards. Ghost would infiltrate alone, neutralize the guards, and extract all 6 hostages without alerting the broader militant network to the rescue operation. She would have no backup, no extraction support, and no communication with command once the operation began. Success would depend entirely on her ability to execute a perfect mission under impossible conditions. What made the mission even more challenging was the timeline. She would have less than 18 hours to travel to the target area, conduct reconnaissance, develop a detailed plan, and execute the rescue. Most military operations of this complexity required weeks of planning and preparation. Ghost would be working with intelligence that was already 12 hours old and photographs that might not accurately reflect current conditions. The SEALs who had been training with her volunteered immediately to provide support, but Ghost declined their assistance. She explained that solo operations were her specialty, and additional personnel would only increase the risk of detection. She would work alone, as she always had, relying on skills and methods that couldn't be replicated by even the most elite teams. Within 2 hours of receiving the mission parameters, Ghost had developed a complete operational plan. She would parachute into the mountains 15 kilometers from the target, approach on foot under cover of darkness, conduct final reconnaissance, and execute the rescue during the early morning hours when guard alertness would be at its lowest. The extraction would be accomplished by moving the hostages to a landing zone where a helicopter would be waiting. The equipment she requested was minimal: a specialized sniper rifle, basic survival gear, communication equipment, and medical supplies for treating potential hostage injuries. She declined offers of body armor, night vision equipment, or electronic surveillance tools. Her philosophy was that excessive equipment could become a liability in situations requiring maximum mobility and stealth. As evening approached, Ghost spent her final hours at the base reviewing satellite imagery and meteorological data. The weather forecast showed a storm system moving through the target area, which would provide additional cover, but also create challenging shooting conditions. She studied wind patterns, precipitation probabilities, and visibility factors with the intensity of a scientist analyzing critical data. The SEALs gathered to see her off, and the respect in their eyes was unmistakable. They had spent days training with someone whose capabilities seemed to transcend human limitations, and now they were watching her depart for a mission that would test even her extraordinary skills. The odds of success were slim, but if anyone could accomplish the impossible, it was Ghost. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan approached her before departure and asked the question that had been on everyone's mind throughout the training program. Who was she really? Where had she come from? How had she developed abilities that seemed to belong in legend rather than reality? Ghost paused for a long moment before answering. She explained that her identity was less important than her purpose. She had been shaped by experiences that had taught her the true cost of failure, the weight of responsibility, and the necessity of exceeding normal human limitations when lives depended on her actions. Her past had been erased not to create mystery, but to ensure that nothing could compromise her ability to complete missions that others couldn't even attempt. She revealed that her training had begun in childhood, not through any government program, but through circumstances that had forced her to develop survival skills from an early age. She had learned to shoot before she learned to drive, to move unseen before she understood why such skills might be necessary. Her abilities were the result of decades of constant refinement, driven by situations where failure meant death. What made her unique wasn't just her technical skills, but her psychological conditioning. She had learned to compartmentalize fear, to function under stress levels that would paralyze most people, and to make life-or-death decisions with perfect clarity even in the midst of chaos. She had become something beyond a normal human operator, a precision instrument designed for impossible missions. The aircraft that would carry her to the target area was waiting, and Ghost gathered her equipment with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. As she prepared to leave, she left the SEALs with a final lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. She explained that true excellence in their field wasn't about being the best shooter, the fastest runner, or the strongest fighter. It was about understanding that every mission, every decision, and every action carried consequences that extended far beyond their immediate objectives. They were responsible not just for completing missions, but for ensuring that their actions made the world a safer place for innocent people. The mission that followed became legend within special operations circles, though the details remained classified for years. Ghost successfully infiltrated the compound, neutralized 12 guards without raising an alarm, and extracted all 6 hostages without casualties. She accomplished this during a severe storm at night in terrain that military analysts had deemed impossible for solo operations. The hostages were recovered safely, the militant cell was disrupted without international incident, and the classified project continued without compromise. Ghost's after-action report was 3 pages long and contained technical details that revolutionized thinking about solo rescue operations. When she returned to Coronado briefly to collect her equipment, the SEALs she had trained found themselves changed by the experience. They had witnessed what was possible when human potential was pushed to its absolute limits, guided by purpose rather than ego. They understood that they had been taught not just by an exceptional operator, but by someone who had dedicated her life to protecting others, regardless of personal cost. The mystery of Ghost's identity remained unsolved, but the impact of her presence continued to influence operations at the base for years to come. The training method she had demonstrated became part of the curriculum. Her tactical innovations were studied and implemented, and her example inspired a new generation of operators to push beyond what they had previously thought possible. Years later, when some of the SEALs she had trained found themselves in impossible situations, they would remember the lessons she had taught them. They would recall her calm focus under pressure, her meticulous attention to detail, and her unwavering commitment to mission success. They would understand that they had been privileged to learn from someone who represented the absolute pinnacle of human capability in their field. Ghost continued to operate in the shadows, appearing when conventional solutions were insufficient, completing missions that others couldn't attempt, and disappearing back into legend. She remained a reminder that in a world of increasing complexity and danger, there were still individuals willing to sacrifice everything to protect the innocent and preserve peace. The woman with no records, no official identity, and no recognition continued to serve as proof that heroism didn't require acknowledgement, that excellence didn't need validation, and that some people chose to measure their worth not by what they gained, but by what they were willing to sacrifice for others. In the elite world of special operations, where respect was earned through action rather than words, Ghost had achieved something rare, universal recognition as the standard against which all others would be measured.